We are in Washington, in the Embassy of the Republic of Poland. The President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda, is with us. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon. Welcome to our viewers.
Mr.
President, when the NATO summit was held in 2008, the President of the Republic of Poland at the time, together with the President of the United States, appealed to the world for Ukraine and Georgia to enter the North Atlantic Pact, because it was to cause geopolitical changes and prevent a tragedy. Many years later, and a few wars later, and we are at the NATO summit, in which the issue of Ukraine and Russian aggression on this country is the most important issue. How do you see this from today's perspective?
Najważniejszą sprawą. Jak pan patrzy na to dziś z tej perspektywy?
No to niestety dzisiaj, kiedy na to patrzymy, to widzimy, jak tragiczna była wtedy ta...
Well, unfortunately, when we look at this today, we see how tragic the decision of the other countries was, apart from Poland and the United States, not to agree to accept Ukraine to NATO and Georgia as well. How tragic it was, this business as usual, these cash-offs that were made with Russia, one, over security and common sense. Above all, over a certain political honesty. I would even use such a term to this extent. Back then, this decision to accept Ukraine and Georgia to NATO was actually blocked by Germany and France in NATO. Lech Kaczynski fought very hard for this. I was then a minister in the presidential office of Lech Kaczynski. I remember what the president said then, how huge of an opportunity he saw in it, and what the consequences were. Because we remember that just a few months later, Russia attacked Georgia. This was, among other things, the result of that completely wrong decision made by the great European countries.
Tej kompletnie błędnej decyzji podjętej przez wielkie państwa europejskie.
Mr. President, today, during the NATO summit, this is the key issue, and the whole world is asking themselves questions about how it will affect the support of NATO countries, but above all, the United States, for the resistance of Ukraine against Russian aggression.
No dzisiaj ta sytuacja jest znacznie trudniejsza, bo wtedy...
Today, this situation is much more difficult because back then, both Ukraine and Georgia were free countries that no one attacked. They were free countries that did not take part in any war. They were free countries, and all they needed was support. All they needed were guarantees through participation in the alliance, and there would certainly not be any war because Russia would never dare to attack NATO countries, especially at that time. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Today we have Ukraine that is fighting full-scale Russian aggression, Ukraine that is fighting, that needs support, and today the most important goal that NATO must achieve is, first of all, the support of Ukraine, and secondly, long-term, not allowing Russia to win the war against Ukraine. This is the most important goal. Russia must not be allowed to win this war. The war must be brought to an end, peace must be established there, it must be brought to the point where peace returns to our part of Europe and the world. But absolutely, the price of this cannot be that Russia will win this war, because then the peace we will achieve will be very short-lived. Russia will attack again.
Zwycięży w tej wojnie, bo wtedy ten pokój, nawet który osiągniemy, będzie bardzo krótkotrwały. Rosja zaatakuje znowu.
Ale czy to oznacza, że państwa NATO...
But does this mean that NATO countries are in agreement that Russia cannot be allowed to leave this war with even a piece of stolen territory? Because this topic is very often left on the side, unclear. At least this is the impression. As if there are countries and forces also on the side of the West that say, let's stop the war, perhaps on one or the other front line, as it looked before.
Tak jak ono wyglądało
Ja przede wszystkim, panie redaktorze, powtarzam bardzo spokojnie.
First of all, I repeat very calmly, if someone wants to light-handedly give a piece of Ukraine to Russia, then please, let them give a piece of their country. What's the problem? If you want to give some land to Russia, just like that, then give a piece of your country. Why do you want to give away someone else's? How do partners react to that? Well, they pretend they don't hear it, but the truth is that this is quite accurate argumentation, correct? Please give away some of your own. You want someone to give someone their bike? Give your bike. You want someone to give someone else their wallet, or from their wallet? Well, give your money, or give your wallet. Give your car. No, it's not just like that. A criminal must be arrested. A criminal cannot have the feeling that he stole something, attacked, destroyed, all in the majesty of general approval. No, such a situation cannot happen, because we will have to deal with another attack. Russian imperialism must be banned and punished in Ukraine. And now there's the question, and you have to think about it. Well, how to do it, in order to end this war and at the same time not allow Russian victory.
Jednocześnie nie dopuścić do rosyjskiego zwycięstwa.
Panie prezydencie, Polska przez całe lata...
Mr. President, throughout the years, Poland has been perceived and is still perceived in the United States as an important ally, and in recent years mainly due to the implementation of large arms purchases, mainly here in the United States. Purchases that you partially negotiated. You took part in talks with the president not far from here, at the time Trump. But in the last hours, in the last days, we have heard, and we showed it on our broadcast, that there are discussions within the Polish government about reducing the scale of these weapons. How do you look at this? And are these real concerns which also concern the military, as you can see from these documents?
Przede wszystkim zapewniam, że będę czynił ze swojej...
First of all, I assure you that I will do everything from my side, everything, so that the level of expenses on defense is not reduced. Because why we started to spend on defense, and I would really prefer to spend this on schools, education, healthcare, social assistance, I really would. I would prefer to build more roads in Poland. I would prefer to support self-government more. I would. But we have to make these expenses on weapons because we have to modernize our military. We have to strengthen it. We have to have a larger army. We have to have potential so that no one dares to attack us. This is the most important goal we want to achieve. This has been absolutely yet to be completed. It is not even partially completed at the moment. It must be continued. Therefore, I will do everything that is possible as President of the Republic of Poland, as long as I am in office, to strictly execute spending the appropriate amount on defense. This is, in my opinion, a minimum of 4% of our annual GDP today. Unfortunately, a minimum of 4% of our GDP, and we should be spending a little more.
Minimum 4% naszego PKB, a powinniśmy wydawać jeszcze trochę więcej.
Panie prezydencie, jak pan rozumie...
Mr. President, how do you look at the information that appeared in the public space, where among those that could be limited if the scale of these expenses decreased, was, among other things, the presence of Allied troops on our territory, which was a fundamental goal of Polish security policy for the entire decade not so long ago?
Czy ja, panie redaktorze, rozumiem tak?
Mr. Editor, in my understanding, if it is true that the revenues of state-owned companies have dropped dramatically in recent months, then what is happening? What is happening? I do not see any change in the international space around us, any international crisis, any serious problem, that the situation would drastically change, for example, in the European or world economy since autumn of last year, so that it would suddenly cause a drop in the revenues of Polish companies. A gigantic drop, as we hear in Orlen, a decline of 1/3. What's going on? Where is the money? Where is the revenue? Maybe the problem really is in the fact that it suddenly turns out that the VAT hole is growing, that the collectability rate of taxes has dropped, etc. But the question is only this: who is allowing whom to steal our money? You know, there was a joke back in the day that was sent to me. It was before the autumn elections, the last parliamentary ones. It was more or less an inscription that said, if the PO party claims that the Peace party is giving away our money, then where was this money during the ruling of the PO party?
Jeżeli Platforma twierdzi prawdę, że PiS rozdaje nasze pieniądze, to gdzie one były za czasów rządów Platformy?
Mr. President, you say, I'm asking, now that the governments of the PO party have returned, where is our money? From what you say, from these doubts that millions of Poles are having, this is a hair-raising conclusion. Because if we are dealing with a drop in revenues, which means some form of fraud, and the government is starting to look for savings in weapons, that means someone is stealing money that is intended for our safety.
Strasznie się wrzeszczy w tej chwili.
There's a lot of yelling currently about how money was being stolen during the Peace Party ruling. Everything was a theft. There was impoverishment everywhere, there was theft everywhere, Peace was making money, Peace members were getting rich from public money. You know who screams thief the loudest? The thief. Usually the thief screams thief. Are we dealing with something like that at the moment? Are thieves screaming catch the thief in Poland?
W bardzo trudnych czasach pandemii
In very difficult times, the coronavirus pandemic, I cooperated with Polish politics, also internally with Prime Minister Morawiecki, with the Polish government of the United Right, with the majority of the parliament then. There were really very difficult moments. The economy practically stood still. We invested billions each day to help people keep their jobs. Did the level of life in Poland drastically drop? No. Did the Polish economy collapse? No. Were we able to raise 500 plus to 800 plus and pay it out? Yes. Were we able to pay out a 13th, 14th pension? Yes. Was there money? There was. Where is it? I ask. Where is it? Either we are dealing with people who allow theft and participate in this procedure, or we are dealing with people who simply allow theft because they don't know how to manage. Either way, it means that they are wimps, that they do not know how to manage the Polish state if it turns out that they don't have money. Because for 8 years, there was money, and it allowed us to carry out all the benefits which they were shouting about, claiming are impossible. Do you remember 2015-16? A rage around 500 plus, that it will break the economy? Balcerowicz and all of the others, the specialists, economists, who were coming out talking about the collapse. It was paid out, and it turned out that not only did the economy not collapse, it began to speed up. Consumption increased, demand increased, people immediately went out and spent this money. Then there was a tourism bond. I will remind you, during the coronavirus pandemic, we gave out a tourism bond. The Polish tourism industry took a breath, a sigh of relief. Money immediately flowed to the Polish tourism industry. Was it possible?
Daliśmy bon turystyczny, branża polska turystyczna odetchnęła, natychmiast popłynęły pieniądze do polskiej branży turystycznej. Dało się.
No, ale dziś słyszymy i powiedział pan coś takiego, że...
But today we hear, and you said something like this, that between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Defense and the Polish government, these kind of doubts appear. What did you hear about this? Because I read your statement after this information was revealed, that this is actually a topic that has already appeared in your circles.
Pojawiał się już wcześniej.
Dostaliśmy informację tożsamą, jak chyba wszyscy inni, że gdzieś w...
We received the same information as everyone else, that somewhere in the Ministry of Finance, information is spreading that defense spending will be cut. I had a meeting with the Minister of National Defense on that same day, Deputy Prime Minister Kosiniak-Kamysz. We were together in the Center for Doctrine and Training of the Polish Army, and I tell him about this situation. I said, Mr. Prime Minister, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to agree with this? He was surprised. He said that he had no information about this and that he would never agree to it. I told him that you can be sure that I will not agree to it either. So if you are against such policy, then I will definitely be on the same side.
Jeżeli będzie się pan wobec takiej polityki zdecydowanie sprzeciwiał, to ja na pewno będę po tej samej stronie.
You stated in Marek Jakubiak's online program that you heard, this is at least how I understood this information, that if Deputy Prime Minister Kosiniak-Kamysz will be put in such a situation, that he will have to cut expenses for weapons, that there will be no place for him in the government. This is a very important declaration. This is what he told me. This is what, expressis verbis, he told me, that if it turns out that the expenses will indeed be not only not maintained, not only not raised, but the expenses for defense will be lowered, he will be forced to resign.
Panie prezydencie, jednocześnie w czasie, kiedy...
Mr. President, at the same time when we are talking here, a demonstration took place in Warsaw. During the last week, we learned about a few testimonies, which I do not remember in the times of Free Poland after 1989. Letters from behind bars from a priest and 2 officials of the Polish state who were detained, who were simply tortured, because there is no other way to name the situation of the humiliation of these women or the treatment of the priest who was detained. How do you look at this information? Because the Polish Prime Minister said that this information is absurd and that he does not even want to comment on it.
Absurdalne i że nawet nie chce mu się ich komentować.
Przede wszystkim sprawa wymaga rzetelnego sprawdzenia. Ja tylko zwracam uwagę, że mamy obecnie do czynienia w Polsce, bo to na pewno tak jest, z absolutnym pokazem hipokryzji ze strony...
First of all, the case requires thorough verification. However, I am noting that in Poland we are currently dealing with absolute hypocrisy from all European institutions, various European NGOs, etc. There has been a drastic violation of the law and the constitution in Poland over the past 6 months. There has been an attack on public television, an almost armed overtaking of public television. There has been an attack on the prosecutor's office. There has been the removal by force or attempts to remove by force of the national prosecutor. In his place, breaking all legal procedures, a so-called national prosecutor was appointed. Today we are dealing with an illegal so-called prosecutor's office which operates and breaks the law. Every day of operation, every operation breaks the law because it was set up in an illegal way. I will note that even the Chief Advocate's Council refused to participate in the procedure as a social participant refused to participate in the procedure of a supposed competition for this prosecutor's office, clearly stating that this is an action that is illegal and is an action contrary to the clear regulations of the law. The president was completely omitted in his competence. We are dealing with clear and obvious lawlessness, and at the same time, we are dealing with representatives of the European Commission who come and talk about the return of the rule of law in Poland. They are simply lying, looking the Polish society straight in the eyes, pretending that they do not see what they are dealing with. And many of them outright say that the ends justify the means. The rule of law must be restored. Therefore, we restore the rule of law with a baton and a whip.
W istocie mają do czynienia, a wielu z nich wprost mówi, no proszę Państwa, no cel uświęca środki. Trzeba przywrócić praworządność, w związku z czym przywracamy praworządność pałką i batem.
Panie prezydencie, w tych świadectwach, które otrzymaliśmy, znajdują się informacje...
Mr. President, in the testimonies that we received, there is information that a detained priest was exposed to the public so that people could photograph him in the company of the officials of the Internal Security Agency. We had to deal with shocking descriptions in which a woman detained by the state of Poland had to undress in the company of men, officials who were observing this. We had unambiguous signals that it was the Internal Security Agency conducting proceedings against all these people, and at least in one case it was openly said by an official that they would prefer to deal with it in a civilized way. But the day before, they were told that they were supposed to act the way they did. This clearly shows that this is some kind of coordinated operation.
Tak jak się zachowują. Przecież z tego oczywiście wynika, że to jest jakaś przeprowadzona i koordynowana przez kogoś operacja.
Panie redaktorze, no ja mam tylko jedną odpowiedź. Sprawa będzie badana.
I have only one answer. The case will be investigated. Whether they will allow it to be investigated at the moment, sooner or later it will be investigated. And the people against whom it will be proven that they violated the law will be punished with full decisiveness. I assure you of that. This will have to be done regardless of what the liars in the institutions of the European Union that we are dealing with today will be saying about Poland, because we know that it is simply a group of political hypocrites to which you simply cannot pay attention to.
Hypokrytów politycznych, na których po prostu nie wolno zwracać uwagi.
Panie prezydencie, cała ta operacja...
Mr. President, this whole operation is related to the history that concerns the Justice Fund, and this whole story is related to a simultaneous process during which in the same, the politicians of the ruling group suggest that the politicians who ruled in Poland until 2023 were to act in an organized criminal group, and at the same time we hear from people who are arrested in this case that they are being tortured so that they burdened with testimony.
Panie redaktorze,
obciążyły zeznaniami.
To są dwie różne sprawy. Czym innym jest prowadzenie postępowania w sprawie ewentualnego popełnienia.
These are two different things. One thing is conducting proceedings in the case of a possible crime, because we do not know that. These cases always require explaining. Crimes happen. Crimes happen everywhere. Therefore, I cannot, as the President of the Republic of Poland, rule out that a crime has been committed. But even if it has been committed, the regulations on the treatment of people who have been arrested, detained, who are in prison are clear, and they must not be broken. Therefore, if we talk about torturing these people, if we talk about breaking human rights, it is a completely different case than a case of accusations of committing crimes, and so on and so forth, because these are two different issues.
I tak dalej, bo to są dwie różne kwestie, zupełnie dwie różne kwestie.
Ale panie prezydencie, to są kwestie zupełnie...
But Mr. President, these are completely unprecedented issues.
Jeżeli są twierdzenia, że doszło do jakichś nieprawidłowości, wymaga szczegółowego
The
wyjaśnienia.
case of the Justice Fund, if there are claims that some injustice has been committed, then it requires detailed investigation and should also be explained for the good of the public. But the case of the treatment of detained people, arrested people, decisions that are made in this context, and by what authorities, because this is the question, this is a completely different thing.
Zupełnie inna rzecz.
W konwencji ONZ-owskiej znajduje się
In the UN Convention, there's a clear definition of what torture is. Deprivation of sleep, attempts to torture mentally in order to extract testimonies or any declarations, both by people who do it directly and by people who supervise it. This is a direct description of the things we read in these letters.
rzeczy, które czytamy w tych listach
No
z
tak,
zakrętu.
ale wie pan, absolutnie uważam, że niestety...
Yes, but you know, I absolutely think that, unfortunately, unfortunately, in the current situation of legal order in which the rule of law is in Poland, since Mr. Tusk is the Prime Minister, all such claims of brutal breaking of the law are highly probable. Because I will remind you, no one else but Mr. Tusk himself, and I have no doubt about it, issued a political order to enter the presidential palace where two deputies stayed with me as guests, whom I had pardoned earlier, because I think that they worked in the name and on behalf of the Polish state and public order, doing their best to complete tasks entrusted to them by the Polish state and by the people who elected them. They entered the presidential palace. In fact, they were taken from the presidential palace almost by force. Force was not used directly in a clear way, but it was an entry without consulting it with me as the host of the presidential palace. It was in fact a breaking of rules which caused a shock in the international space, because I spoke with, for example, representatives of the American administration who could not believe that something like this could happen in Poland. They asked me about it. I confirmed that, unfortunately, such a situation took place, and unfortunately, we are dealing with such people today. So those who break the law, those who, as I mentioned, illegally take over public television, who illegally take over the prosecutor's office, who simply break all the rules, it is possible that they also commit human rights violations. It's very possible.
Z takimi ludźmi, więc którzy łamią prawo, którzy, tak jak powiedziałem, w nielegalny sposób zajmują telewizję publiczną, którzy w nielegalny sposób zajmują prokuraturę, którzy działają po prostu ze złamaniem wszelkich reguł, możliwe, że dopuszczają się również drastycznego łamania praw człowieka.
Panie prezydencie, to ostatnie pytanie.
Mr. President, this is the last question. Today, an open letter was addressed to yourself as well from the Polish newspaper clubs with a request to organize the Human Rights Congress precisely because of these matters. How do you look at this idea? How do you approach this idea?
Uważam, że jeżeli jest takie...
I believe that if there is such a social demand, then with all certainty, some form of debate on these issues, if not social control in the end, must be launched. Unfortunately, this is the reality we have today in Poland. Maybe this is the way to tell the world about it as well, because liberal media do not inform about it. Leftist liberal politicians of Europe pretend that nothing is happening. The representatives, the outstanding leaders of the Polish law, who pulled their hairs from their heads a few years ago over Polish law, now pretend that they do not see. As one of the professors said, they are so busy with scientific work that unfortunately they do not see that there is law being broken in Poland at every step of the way. Unfortunately, this is the reality we are dealing with. It is likely that certain groups in Poland who believe that their privileges could be violated in some way by the governments of the United Right, now they deeply believe that their privileges, most often they do not deserve them at all, will be given to them, returned by the current rulers.
Zostaną im dane, nie wiem, przywrócone przez obecnie rządzących.
Mr. President, thank you very much for this meeting. President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda, from Washington, for Telewizja Republika. Thank you very much. But I deeply believe, Mr. Editor, that Poles are already aware of their strength as a society, as voters, as people who deeply believe in democracy, that they will restore order in Poland with their votes at the polls.
Swoimi głosami przy urnach wyborczych.
The President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda. Thank you very much, Mr. President.